This is Sg2 Perspectives, a weekly conversation between the Sg2 intelligence team and industry thought leaders about the biggest trends in healthcare. We're happy you joined us today. Enjoy the episode.
Do you cascade goals around access throughout your entire organization? Is it managers and up, directors and up, C-suite and up? What does that look like? And how do we align our strategic goals to those of the entire organization as a way of change management?
Welcome to Sg2 Perspectives. I'm your host, Trevor DaRin. I have three colleagues with me, Rebecca Limestall, Jayme Zage, co-host you know and love, and Anthony Guth. We were all at the same event last week with a range of C-suite participants at one of the Vizient member network meetings. We all got to sit in different rooms, talk to different individuals, hear different presentations. Let's pretend we're in the car home and we get to debrief on all the cool stuff we heard, because for 2.5 days, we got to hear great examples and perspectives from such a smart group of participants from a huge range of organizations across the country. It's always really exciting and energizing. Rebecca, I'll go to you first. What's something you heard that really changed the way you think about the main theme, the problem that they were working on and talking about, and that's access and capacity?
I spent most of my time during this session talking with chief strategy officers, but also in attendance were ambulatory leaders, physician leaders, quality leaders, and community health leaders, which gave a more rounded perspective on the topic of access and capacity. What I learned, though, is what did come from the chief strategy officer session. I learned there very much in the tactical phases of getting buy-in, support, alignment. Oftentimes we think of access as being a strategic decision or strategic decision that's in need of execution or operations, but it felt like a lot more internal tactical work was occurring. Some of the most popular conversations had to do with processes, ways of making decisions, prioritization. This internal aspect of the work surprised me and changed my perspective, which tends to be a market-first perspective.
I mean, someone said, I feel like my job is being the chief alignment officer.
Mm-hmm.
And they felt like they needed to prioritize more and more of that time. And they said, the data work isn't top of license. Yes, teams rely on us for that. We can't get stuck there. I need to go a level up and focus on alignment. Jayme, you got to hear some different audiences. What stood out to you?
It's not so much changed my perspective, but validated something that we had been debating not too long ago ourselves as a team. It was in one of the morning sessions focusing in on value-based care and about reconsidering the place for service lines. It's this idea that if you are going to provide value to the patient, it should be less about the service line or the specialty and more about what needs to happen when for that patient. And what is the team that we need to bring together? And how do we facilitate those effective handoffs? The way it was phrased in terms of how we organize, maybe service lines aren't the right way, was what was surprising to hear from a client organization. Because we had been debating this as a team, it caught my interest.
I agree. It was really nice hearing a client talk about how they organize their health system and how that helps deliver the care that they want to deliver and what the shortcomings are. We're all trying to figure this out. We're trying to figure out whether the right way to organize our health systems is via service lines or maybe a little bit more patient-centric. What happens if a patient needs to interact with 3, 4, 5, 6 service lines? What does that look like? There are no right answers and no one's doing it super well right now. That's what I walked away with. That's just a perpetual, perennial challenge people are trying to deal with. What we heard from in that talk, Jayme, was we just need to strive as best as we can to be as patient-centric as possible. That's the only way to truly solve this access challenge thing. If it's difficult for them to navigate, if it's difficult for the patient to get in right away, then we're going to lose. It's how we organize ourselves to make it as accessible and easy to use as possible.
The thing that really popped that I hadn't heard someone talk about or say is how much strategy was thinking about philanthropy as a new channel and means for growth. In some places, it was, we've actually identified that as a potential hurdle because it's complicated. The university has its own foundation. It's hard to get support for essentially ongoing operations when you don't have a building to put someone's name on. But those are the kind of programs that are great candidates for philanthropic levels of funding to either maintain or start something new. As soon as someone said it, everyone around the room was kind of nodding along. Yep, we're thinking about that in a different way. Yep, we're thinking about fundraising beyond ways we have in the past. SaaS, even going as far as to say something like concierge medicine, depending on the market you're serving, depending on the size of that, depending on the scope of services you offer, can even be viewed almost as a loss leader where, great, but these are relationships with people who can be outstanding donors down the road. It's not big revenue anyway, so positive or negative margins, not a huge difference. That was a great conversation, something that felt new to me. Tony, what felt new to you?
I wouldn't say it was new, but it was refreshing to hear a stronger emphasis on total cost of care, value-based care, maybe stepping out of this fee-for-service world a little bit more and more intentionally. I liked hearing about what health systems are doing to invest in something that's a loss leader, willing to take a hit on something that maybe downstream saves some cost. There was a lot of conversations on readmissions, those potentially avoidable readmissions, on service distribution, making sure patients are going to the right spot at the right time. This all requires investment in the ambulatory space that doesn't have a clear ROI and is hard to get past the capital planning team. It's easier to build a new bed, a new tower, a new operating room, but it's hard to invest in something like a wound care clinic or a virtual health program. How do we reduce the total cost of care? How do we get into these risk-based contracts? We've been talking about this forever. I started at Sg2 in 2014, and the first project I had was to help a health system figure out whether they should lead their market towards value. And our projections were like, oh, most of your revenue is coming in risk-based contracts, VBC, the vast majority in a few years. And it's been like 12, and we're still in the fee-for-service world. It was nice to see some real action and some real examples of what health systems are doing to accommodate that, to move in that direction. There's just so much risk aversion out there with this old hospital-centric fee-for-service mindset. Why would I move anything out of my hospital if I'm not rewarded for it by the payers or the consumers?
The clinicians on the panel from this organization that were talking about having to make tough decisions about those who are in the risk models getting a different standard of care. And knowing that the fee-for-service patients were not getting the same access, the same types of supportive services, being able to live in that discomfort for a while, knowing that eventually the goal is everyone would get the same care again. And it wasn't inequity in terms of the way we traditionally think about it, but only based on the payer model. If they were in a risk-based contract, they got access to different services. And that is a discomfort we've talked about, but I haven't seen health systems sort of embrace the discomfort of it in that way and say, we have to do this to be sustainable. We don't have the margins now to do what we used to do, which was let everybody into those programs. So that was an interesting component of that value-based care equation, is that this is still stepwise.
Something new that I learned wasn't new at all. It was probably a blind spot that I had. Even though I've worked with strategy teams for 20 plus years, I was not fully aware how much they were being pulled into the employee metrics of where they set their goals for the organization and how to cascade them to individual employees. And that was something that took up quite a bit of conversation about, do you cascade goals around access throughout your entire organization? Is it managers and up, directors and up, C-suite and up? What does that look like? And how do we align our strategic goals to those of the entire organization as a way of change management? This was something that was just surprising to me and a bit refreshing to know that we should be aligning the strategic goals with incentives, but how often are we able to do that? And what does that look like for something as vague as increasing access?
Thanks for reminding me of that conversation. I want to hear something that was kind of a small thing, but it made a big difference. But a little piece that sort of allowed one of these tactical initiatives or the way a system was positioning and thinking about a strategy or an initiative change. And for me, it was when systems were kind of thinking about options for virtual access. Do we invest in direct-to-consumer, virtual first options because that's what it seems like consumers are choosing in the market, especially a younger demographic that we're losing touch with. They did a bunch of interviews with local employers that they were planning on either putting an in-person clinic or having some dedicated offering. Even employees that we would think of as a huge multinational tech firm said, no, I want a relationship with a provider. It's really valuable to me that when I either see them virtually or in person, but that it's someone I have a relationship with and that I can grow as my life continues with this provider or group. That adds value to me. And they had to pump the brakes on how they had been thinking about this access option. That was a cool one to hear. Rebecca, what stood out to you?
I was seeing a lot of creativity in program design from organizations that were looking to increase access. Trevor and I had the opportunity to facilitate a panel with 2 physicians from Ohio State and 1 individual who led ambulatory operations from Emory. The 2 Ohio State examples in particular, they questioned long-held assumptions and challenged the norm by putting something in place. The one assumption that was challenged through their cardiovascular program was either a patient is immediate, acute, needs to be seen right now, or can wait. They challenged that assumption, said, actually, there's a lot of middle ground here. Let's figure out a way to get early access, but not to emergent services, but to be able to get in and to work with a cardiovascular team quicker. On their more primary care side, they question the assumption that all of their physicians, all of their providers need to be teaching and research as well. And they staffed a very critical clinic with APPs and physicians with pure clinical responsibilities. By questioning those assumptions that are long held at an academic medical center was a really good way to get to some of the creativity that we're going to need in the future.
There was a conversation between peer systems. I think they were all AMCs in the group sharing some best practices. And this one gentleman shared how a patient couldn't get in. He had heart failure and he ended up passing away. So he couldn't get in. It was a terrible story. And everyone seemed really interested in sharing, oh, well, we have this that could have maybe prevented that. And it was just really refreshing to see. One peer system said, oh, we actually installed basically a button in our EMR that says this is urgent. The patient isn't communicating in a way that we understand. We understand that the person talking about this patient who died maybe just wasn't communicating. The patient just wasn't communicating in a way that our doctor understood as like, this is an urgent thing. Well, someone else said, well, there should be a button. This is an urgent patient, needs to get in the next day. We've got 12 slots every day reserved for patients just like this. Hit the button, get the patient in the next day. And then another peer organization said, well, isn't every physician just going to hit that button? Because we installed that and everyone just uses the button regardless of whether it's urgent or not. That was just very illuminating to me. You've got to fix, and then someone pokes a hole in it right away. And it was just that shared space where everyone's spitballing ideas like, this is what we're doing. Oh, that wouldn't work for us. The second thing was just how many organizations are still hesitant to move their surgical cases out of the hospital just because the payment's not there yet. It's just a simple matter of, I'm getting paid this in the hospital outpatient department. I'm never going to move until the payer punishes me. And so it's still a very strong sentiment. The strategic importance of maybe moving before you're pushed, before you're punished. It's still surprising to see how many organizations are still set. This is the hospital. This is our business. This is the core of our business. And we're not going to move unless forced to.
The small thing was more about how to take a pilot program, learn from it, and make it functional and have a big impact in doing that. I was in a session focused on care at home. This is a paramedicine program, and they tried it a few years back and found that it just wasn't sustainable. The way that they had used the paramedics and the way they had designed the leadership structure, the leader left and then there was nothing there, and it was inconsistency in the way the paramedics who were off duty would respond. What this organization did when they came back to the EMS system, the local fire department, again, to say, hey, could we try this again? Is they said, well, why didn't it work the first time? And how do we do it different the next time? 2 small changes. One, using someone and more of a position within the organization to lead the program, but certainly still a champion. And then 2 was how they used paramedics. Instead of having off-duty paramedics respond as they are able, they went to a single individual who was really passionate about supporting the project, and they became the de facto, I can go visit all these patients in their home. These are patients who were in the revamped pilot. These are patients who are high utilizers of the ED. They're repeat utilizers. They're there all the time. And how do we make sure we're getting them the care they need in between so that maybe they don't have to be in the ED as much? That's the whole goal. And what they saw in implementing with this small change with a dedicated paramedicine, and it goes back to some of that relationship stuff we heard before, so those patients got to know that paramedicine. They would rely on him. As a result, they saw some pretty significant reductions from this patient population in 911 calls and in ED utilization. Big impact for a small population. And as they grow the program, they'll figure out how to scale that. But just by making some small tweaks, they were able to really flip the impact.
Rebecca, did you hear something surprising, something you didn't expect? You and I had exposure to a lot of this because one of the great things about the Chief Strategy Officer group is once someone goes down a tangent, if other people want to jump on, it could be a half an hour tangent. And so we get to explore a lot of areas that maybe weren't on the agenda. I definitely have something that surprised me. What did you hear?
The overall tone surprised me so much. When we pull the chief strategy officers together, they're very external focused, 3-year focused in a lot of ways. This felt tactical, very short term, very much let's tackle some problems together. There was one problem that was brought forward by an organization who had some state regulations in place around pharmacy. And they said, how would you work it? And there was a lot of discussion about, well, could you do this? Could you do this? A lot of tactical problem solving for the next 6 months, 18 months, and a lot less angst as far as the broader policy landscape. That's what surprised me, is the focus of this meeting kept the group that we work with, who's usually more long-term, in that shorter-term space.
So Rebecca and I were in all the same meetings. The thing that stood out to me was completely different, more of a positive. When we were talking about service distribution, we showed them our inpatient portfolio, made them discuss, are you spending more time on the higher tertiary end of the spectrum or the lower acuity end of the spectrum? We were going to kind of have to push people on the ability to move stuff out and backfill. People were kind of already there, and they felt like, actually, I have line of sight to get enough low acuity stuff out, whether that was getting more patients into FQHCs or building our own lookalikes or building better post-acute care to reduce readmissions or distributing services to community hospitals in or out of our network. They were like, yeah, I think we can shift enough here to build a more sustainable mix down that path. And the scale of change was going to be pretty substantial. That was surprising.
I agree. That felt very much like we're trying to get to scale with some of our pilots, things like Care at Home. We're trying to figure out how to make this work to make our system sustainable.
Mm-hmm. If you're like me, you probably walk away with 10 things where it's like, geez, the way they were talking about that, I got to learn a little bit more about that. For me, it was the combination between retail pharmacy and infusion. How many systems are also leveraging their expertise and their retail pharmacy scale to have more of a consultative model with other providers or even small mom and pop pharmacies because they want to keep big national, especially infusion players, out of the market. Digging into that dynamic, how much of a competitive space it is, how much of a margin generating service it is today for health systems. That felt like an extremely competitive frontier that was taking up a lot of strategic space for chief strategy officers' minds that I need to better understand all the nuance there. Tony, anything you've decided you need to learn more about?
I needed to learn more about these organizations who are making these first steps towards becoming an ambulatory first health system. How are they organizing themselves? No one has an answer for that. We don't even have an answer for that really at Sg2. There's no one size fits all thing. As they try and figure out how to prioritize these ambulatory investments, how do they structure the organization so that someone's accountable, they're able to measure, and they can set this ambulatory business unit up for success? No one has a good answer for that. Everyone has questions, including ourselves. So that's something I want to learn more about. Just gather more from our members about what they're doing. And then hopefully we can aggregate them in a way that we can find some common characteristics, because it's just a big question mark right now.
And I got to spend time with chief quality officers. It's not a place I spend a lot of time with traditionally. How do we bring strategy and quality together? Because quality can help so much with the execution of strategy. And so that's a place where I'd like to lean in more for those who are doing it really well. How does that support not just financial health, but also positioning ourselves better to achieve those strategic goals? The other place where we're in an exciting time, and I really want to watch how this evolves, is hospital at home. We had a speaker on hospital at home about the access, the better location for care. And now that we have an extension of the waiver that is significant, so we've got some time to really start to figure out what does good look like in hospital at home. Talking with the physician who leads a hospital at home program, and she and I were discussing the fact there are no standards. There are no established guidelines. When we can actually use the experiences that we've seen up to now and start thinking about how do we investigate what works best for hospital at home, that's an exciting time for us to be in, to be able to explore how to leverage that to the best of its ability.
One thing I want to learn more about is I have long been someone pushing our strategic teams to say no more, say no to the good idea in favor of a better idea. I heard a lot more of that this time, and I'm very curious how the culture is changing at organizations and how much more they'll be able to get done as they move forward with greater prioritization and making sure that decisions stick. And I'm also going to share a quick quote that I thought was quite humorous in the conversation we had with the strategy officers. We asked them, how do all the different leaders that were gathered for this event think about access and what does it look like in their eyes? And do you have an aligned view of access? And someone said, well, the only aligned part about our view on access is the anxiety. That one made me chuckle a little bit and also set us in terms of the reality of the importance of access and capacity.
I'm so mad you remembered that quote and I forgot. That was such a good one. Thank you all. That was a terrific debrief. I wish we actually got to do the car ride home and do a longer debrief, but thanks as always for sharing your perspectives. Talk to you again soon. Thanks for listening to this episode of Sg2 Perspectives. Please don't hesitate to reach out to Sg2 if you have questions or suggestions for future episodes.